Welcome to Cross-Pollinations. This is a curatorial research platform that explores relationships between poetry and healthcare, and we're funded by the League of Canadian Poets, the Health Arts Research Centre, and the Canadian Association for Health Humanities. My name is Mick Jones. I'm a poet, and I curate this series. I work and live in Toronto, and I am so grateful for that. Before I introduce tonight's theme and speakers, I want to acknowledge that this land belongs to many Indigenous nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Wendat First Nations, and so many others. And in light of tonight's topic, which is speaking about therapy, poetry, embodied storytelling, and intergenerational trauma, and working through that with community building, I want to spotlight a local center, Anishinaabe Health Toronto, and they blend traditional Indigenous care, healthcare practices with contemporary therapy modalities, and they offer a wide range of services and medicines to support mental health in local Indigenous communities. And I urge you to consider this land acknowledgement more of a call to action to support their work, whether that be by sharing with your communities or in the form of donations. And in a moment, I'll link their website in the chat. And while we were preparing for tonight and thinking through these really important and relevant subjects, I also asked tonight's speakers, Hajer and Zainib, to choose a mutual aid fund particularly relevant to their offering and their work. And as this event is free to attend, we really encourage you to spend what you would in maybe a ticket to a show, or ideally more, on a donation to the Samir Project. They are a donations based aid initiative led by Palestinians working to supply aid to displaced families in Gaza. And you'll see in the link that I'm going to share that there's multiple different options of where you want to donate to through them. Really amazing project. And if you do make a donation, what we like to do during Cross-Pollinations is in the chat, drop how much you donated and where you're joining from, and all kind of making some mutual collective energy, keep the thunder rolling. And then I calculate along the side how much we raise, and using that collective energy and using the brilliant offerings we're going to have, the reflections we're going to be thinking about to make action. And so, as I mentioned tonight, I'm so thrilled and honored to be joined by poet Hajer Mirwali and psychotherapist Zainib Abdullah. We will be discussing the role of therapists and poets as witnesses of intergenerational trauma, somatic and embodied storytelling, and rebuilding community through collective healing. I'm going to go ahead and drop those links into the chat now. So just give me one moment. Last month, we raised about $1,000 to the mutual aid funds we had selected, and one of those funds was a poet who is in Gaza right now, and she just had a book that was released that I'm also going to drop in the chat because it's a really amazing collection. And now it is my absolute joy to introduce tonight's poet, Hajer Mirwali. She is a Palestinian and Iraqi writer living in Toronto. Her first book, Revolutions, from Talonbooks, released this year, is a collection of poetry on shame, pleasure, and Arab Muslim girlhood. And I really can't say enough in reading this. I was really lucky to get an early copy, and I couldn't put it down. I read it in one sitting. It is so important and relevant, and right now we are witnessing and always witnessing so much, and to engage directly with Hajer's work is an absolute gift and helps form politics just in reading their work. Two poems from the collection also appear in an anthology of Palestinian poetry called Heaven Looks Like Us from Haymarket Books that was also released this year. Hajer's work has been published in the Ex-Puritan, Brick Magazine, Room Magazine, Brick Magazine, and Joyland. She has an MFA in creative writing from the University of Guelph, and we are so lucky to witness her read. So please join me in welcoming Hajer.
Thank you so much, Mick. I'm really, really excited about this event. As I was writing this book and thinking about the readings and the way I wanted to share the book with people, I already was thinking so much about the overlap with therapy. And so it really was just, I felt like the stars aligned when Mick emailed me with this idea. So I'm very, very happy to be here today. So I'm going to read 3 poems today, and I will give a little context about the book first, just to help you, to help us, like, to ground us in the poems I'm going to read. So Revolutions, this is how it looks in case anyone has not seen it. It's a response to a kinetic sculpture called Plus and Minus by a Palestinian artist named Muna Hatoum. And the sculpture is a bed of sand. It's like a circular bed of sand, and it has 2 mechanical arms. And the first arm rotates around the sand and makes grooves, and the second arm follows it and smooths out the sand. So it's constantly making and unmaking these grooves of sand, in the sand. And Muna Hatoum being Palestinian, and I'm half Palestinian, so when I first saw the sculpture, it really spoke to me on levels of presence and absence. And then the more I engaged with it, or like the more I kind of watched it revolve, I started to pull out these other meanings from it. And I began thinking very particularly about how young Arab Muslim women make and unmake ourselves while we navigate living in a society with constant shame, judgment, and surveillance within our community, and waiting to feel some kind of pleasure. And there's this version of ourselves that exists publicly in our communities and families, and then a version that exists privately when we're outside of the home. And so I was really interested in the question of how we reconcile these 2 selves while still honoring and respecting our community and our heritage. So I wasn't so interested in living in this kind of rejection and defiance, but more about how to find points of connection and authenticity as we are going through this process of making and unmaking ourselves. And the more I wrote about daughterhood, I also had to really write about motherhood as well, and ultimately came to these conclusions that the system that we're subjected to as daughters is the same system that our mothers exist in. And all of that trauma and the shame is what I started to imagine as the circle of sand in the sculpture that's passed down to us from our mothers. And we have no choice but to take it, but how we carry it throughout our lives is up to us. And I was very lucky in writing this project. I got a travel grant to go see the sculpture in person in Barcelona, and I took my mom with me on that trip. So the first poem I'm going to read is called Meeting Plus and Minus, and it's like it's a diary of that trip with my mom. January 18th. On the plane, Mama asks if X has a boyfriend. We are 2 women talking about a girl we are worried for. We eat the halal meal. We scroll past a photo on Instagram, think how ugly that girl's shoes are. We sleep on our shoulder. We feel our warmth doubling. We forget our obligation to split. We remember a few months ago that outdoor movie screening with limited parking, The first time in our lives, anger revealed to one another our naked body behind the curtain. Perhaps it was the excitement of travel or being far away from everyone. But once we passed security in Toronto, I felt my arms conjugate with hers. January 19. Gaudi's warriors protected the rooftop of Casamila. Everything was soft. I looked at the sky through a circle. I followed the spiral stairs to become smaller and smaller. I held my mother's bag. Her hand fell under the square of sunlight as she passed it to me. We visited the exhibition last. She walked to the end where plus and minus was while I slowly looked at the rest of the art. When she returned, she was disappointed for me. Your piece is this small, she said, holding her thumb and index finger close together. The blades create two borders. Linear border separating grooved sand from smooth sand. Circular border where sand has accumulated at blades' ends. Does a circle mean you can return? Does a circle mean you can't leave? Plus and minus as argument. I am emptying of ways to lie to Mama, opening more holes for my lies. January 20th. Because I am serrated, I am not. Dreaming into the state of observing grooves immortalized in the bed of sand. At another museum, I find sand. Along the streets of the Gothic Quarter, sand. Under a porcelain bowl, sand. Because I am smooth, I am not. With plus and minus today and without. A marble figure of a man reclined moves more inside me. I wait for Mama to wander to the next room. I cry for his stillness. Tendons on a marble foot, not unlike my tendons. I am never not. Marble frustration, sand. Marble dick imprint, sand. Marble belly button, sand. Because I am always and never away. January 21st. A reality mobile continually transforming. Open works encompass, implore, foreign to fluorescent light until even that is paled again. Today throbs. Center of the circling vibration swells inside a balloon dream of slivered light seizing ceaseless power. Plus and minus revolution's language. Giving, giving, giving with any arm it can procure. I oscillate. Concentric strokes compress around my head. It takes 30 seconds to complete one revolution. Another visitor. This is so soothing. When Mama calls, I say I'm still at the gallery so I can order my ham croquette and Mao. Pretend they give freedom. January 22nd. In 1994, Mama gave birth to me in Amman on her way from Baghdad to Richmond Hill. And Muna, with wood, sand, metal, electric motor, transported us to the first home we were exiled from. 2 daughters of a revolutionary split. 2 mothers of a contracting uterus waiting to be Palestinian again. Past noon. Shadows cast by a swinging mobile are longer, higher. Repetitive sounds mimic Muna's repletion. Whirring projector light, needle hitting copper thread. Mama held my slippery body to her chest. Mama's slippery body on my chest. She asks if I have ever listened to plus and minus. Grains of sand flowing through one another. Every daughter grain resorbs her mother grain as first foreign body, lives her whole life with that inside her. I later fixed Muna's repletion to repetition to repletion. Muna so near bursting, every line she erases reconfigures its genes into another line. Every time Mama asks what I'm writing, I only say plus and minus. January 23rd. Plus and minus. I have come too far to feel nothing. Wait for me in the dark room. Strip apart my arms. Hear me change. Daughter of plus and minus. Daughter, daughter, more daughterly with every rotation. What are you writing about? A sculpture. Yes. Yes. A very good daughter who loves her motherlands and her God. A daughter more and less. A daughter plus and minus. Never the same twice. So the next poem, hopefully I'm okay on time, but if I'm going really past the 15 minutes, please let me know. Um, so the second poem I'm going to read, it's called Hourglass Procedure, and there's a few of them throughout the book. And another thing I just want to say about the book is to help me write it, I interviewed girls in my community and I asked them about their relationship with shame, pleasure, and waiting, and how those things are also in relation to their families and to their parents. And I recorded and transcribed the interviews. And I changed all of the girls' names to X, which I write as 7 X's in the book. And it was to maintain their anonymity, but also to point to the idea of censorship and erasure, which might be imposed by our communities, but it's also like a self-imposed erasure as a protective measure. And an earlier version of the plus and minus sculpture was actually called self-erasing drawing. So that's something I was thinking about as well. And then pieces of these interviews are kind of woven throughout the book, and some of it is going to be in the poem I'll read now. So the hourglass procedure, these poems I wrote while like turning over an hourglass. It was a 20-minute hourglass, and the poems are meant to be read back and forth the same way that you would turn an hourglass and move the sand between the two spheres. So this is, I think it's the second hourglass procedure that's in the book. I don't know if anyone has the book, but it's on page 57. Maybe it was that time she played hide and seek with her family friends, and with only 2 seconds left, she and that boy quickly hid under the bed together. Maybe X knew it was a bad idea. Maybe when X's brother found her, he slapped her hard across the face and said, maybe you shouldn't have been under the bed with that boy, even if it was just a game. While waiting to come, X wonders why. She tries again the next night, closes her eyes and thinks of nothing but waves moving over her body. If she gets really high with a long massage beforehand, X and X and X and sex, excess and yes and eyes and eyes and X and X and X. Does any X know she is the same as another X? One plane desiring, one plane interrupting. I keep thinking about X's inside brain. X says they should study the relationship between girls raised in religious households and passivity during sex. In this irreversible way, sand sounds louder at the beginning while it's still hitting glass. Sound of sand on glass versus sound of sand on sand. Sand and sad and sound and send and gland and glad. Sound of sand on glass versus sound of sand on sand. Sand sounds louder at the beginning while it's still hitting glass. In this irreversible way, X says they should study the relationship between girls raised in religious households and passivity during sex. I keep thinking about X's inside brain. One plane desiring, one plane interrupting. Does any X know she is the same as another X? X and X and X and sex, excess and yes and eyes and X, send X, send X. If she gets really high with a long massage beforehand, closes her eyes and thinks of nothing but waves moving over her body. She tries again the next night. While waiting to come, X wonders why. Maybe it was that time she played hide and seek with her family friends, and with only 2 seconds left, she and that boy quickly hid under the bed together. Maybe X knew it was a bad idea. Maybe when X's brother found her, he slapped her hard across the face and said, maybe you shouldn't have been under the bed with that boy, even if it was just a game. Um, okay, the last poem I'm going to read is also the last poem in the book, and it's also the poem that I wrote last, which I know doesn't always happen, but it's a poem that I wrote actually years later, and it's when I was in the editing process. I just felt like there wasn't enough of the mother's voice in the book, and I was trying to think of how to bring that in a little bit more. And so I wrote this poem from the perspective of the mother. So this is the final poem, and it's called Sift. If I could say anything, I would say it could not have been my fault. Say I created plus and minus. Say I trapped you in the sand with me. Say I was scared and all I could do was circulate fear to you, hold you when you were scared. Say it was me, hypothetical or definitive, question or charge. Say I was the cause of all your pain. Even then, it could not have been my fault, my daughter. I was a mother only in the way I knew how to be a daughter, forced into circles by an invisible force. I had to keep moving. My nails dragging through the dirt became your nails. Hands I passed on to you genetically and by burden could not have been my fault. My body created to create your body. I birthed you in sand for one revolution. Every revolution, a new birth. Every birth, a new daughter. Every daughter easier to birth revolution, getting smaller and smaller. All my daughters took on my shape. I was a mother to other mothers and fathers, daughters that weren't my own, making me more motherly, more mother. I was a mother to make more mothers. I made you in my mother image, my fault, my mirror. I washed henna out of mother's hair with hands that lifted daughter's feet off hot sand, with hands that peeled garlic raw for father, kept father calm, covered his eyes before daughter, covered his ears, put him back to sleep, carried a weight only I could see. My fault, my womb, what a mess. I created sand everywhere. Every line of sand for you. Every line I created, you destroyed. Every line destroyed, created new lines. Pull us together and apart while waiting to feel what happens at the next revolution. It could not have been my fault. My arm could not reach your arm, even as we connected around the same violence. It could not have been your fault. Daughter facing outward, you could not see what holds you to the earth. We only spin in circles until we learn how to turn in, sift through sand inside our bodies, observe it is the same sand, same body. Thank you.
Wow. I'm coming on to do an applause from everyone because that was so incredible. Thank you so much for that reading, Hajer. I was so amazed with how much on my first read of your book, all the senses are activated in reading it, and now getting to listen to you read, that just happens in such a more livid and active way. At first, I was really thinking about the visuals of your poetics, especially returning to that reference. But this time, I was really just thinking about the sonics and also like the tactile nature of it. I loved that you let us in on on the process of hourglass. It's an incredible approach, and I'm so fascinated. I have so many more questions I want to ask you, but I will save those and just say once again thank you for that amazing reading.
Thank
We are so
you.
lucky. Next, we have our next guest, Zainib Abdullah. And a little fun fact, who is actually Hajer's cousin. So we have a wonderful family event happening tonight, a family collaboration happening live. Zainib is a psychotherapist and the founder of Wellnest, a Toronto based mental health clinic. The Wellness team, a collective of diverse psychotherapists, focus on supporting the needs of the BIPOC community. As a trauma therapist, her approach is client centered, anti racist, anti oppressive, and trauma informed, incorporating various therapeutic modalities. Zainab uses somatic based therapy to help clients heal and manage trauma experiences, and she supports clients in accessing greater connectedness to their inner wisdom and peace. When we met before tonight's event to talk through this subject and the connection between therapy and poetry, I was constantly writing down things Zainab was saying and left enlightened by a brief meeting. So I'm so excited for everyone here tonight to hear Zainab and witness her practice. So please join me in welcoming Zainib Abdullah.
Thank you so much, Meg. I'm going to start my timer here so I'm on time because I was so excited coming into this conversation. I just had so many reflections, but first of all, Hajer, you read two of my favorite poems. And for me, and I think people now knowing the connection, I could hear my aunt's voice as I'm reading it. And so the experience was just so much more visceral on a visceral level. And it's beautiful hearing you read it. So thank you. Every time I interact with your work, and I think why I was so excited to have this conversation, there's just so much, it's so affirming and so healing because I come into this work as a therapist, but I also come into this conversation as an Arab and a daughter of immigrants. And so many of the experiences that Hajer and the themes that Hajer explores in her work are very, very personal. But I'll start off with the reflections that I had just about the intersection between poetry and therapy. And I know Meg, Hajer, and I had a conversation before coming into the space, and I'll kind of launch off from a metaphor that Hajer offered us in terms of the therapist and the poet holding a mirror to our experience, our healing experiences. And I really, when I was thinking about the intersection between poetry and therapy, what continued to stand out to me is the power of language that's offered to experience through both crafts, and how much healing comes when we are offered language that can help us integrate our entire experience, especially since trauma disembodies us and disconnects us and fragments us. That this mirror, and I love the analogy of a mirror because it's very, I like to think that as I approach my work, I'm constantly being reflexive and thinking about decolonized way of holding space. And one of the ways that I think we decolonize spaces as therapists is really not coming in as experts or offering directives to someone's experience. And somatic work really helps us see that on such an embodied level, the power of our inner wisdom, the power that we carry and we all innately have on our healing journeys. And so oftentimes that is the role of a therapist, is holding that mirror, helping kind of join and journey alongside folks on their healing journey so that they are really coming back to the healing wisdom within them. And obviously within that healing wisdom, there's an offering of language. But even when I think of language being offered in the therapeutic process, it's it really is only relevant in healing in as much as it feels aligned with the inner experience and the felt experience. And so, and that leads me to sort of just my own experience coming into therapy as someone who shares a background and a history, like ancestral history with Hajer, being a daughter of immigrants, an Arab daughter of immigrants, coming into therapy was really this intention of like lessening suffering and helping others is how I came into the process. But um, when you enter the process, you very quickly realize and recognize that the healing happens inside, to be able to really be redirected to that need to heal from shame, from so many of the themes that are mentioned in Hajer's work, in that um, that desire to help others was actually a desire to understand this shared suffering and the suffering that's been carried and inherited, directly experienced, but also carried as we come into this process. And so throughout this work, what became really clear to me as I continued to seek that healing and that level of therapeutic support was this missing experience of having someone with a shared experience sitting across from me, offering me that support. And even though I've been with the same therapist for over a decade now, and she doesn't share my experience or identity because of the level of healing that has happened already within that space, in the early parts of the journey, that was something that really drove me to in search for that space, or to create that space where we can, because so much of therapy, and even as I think of uh, poetry and the healing arts, is that there are missing experiences that are often because of trauma, that never got to happen, that never got to materialize, that never got to be embodied, that once met, acknowledged, filled in this way, healing actually happens. But so much of what I experienced myself, but then later as I entered the work, and mostly I think what I attracted to my practice are folks who are children of immigrants, are folks who are racialized. And what I found coming into the space is that we've spent so much time moving into healing spaces, doing this double work in the therapeutic process, trying to like dance around shame because we also are protective of our communities. And that really speaks to what Hajer was saying. I also was not interested in the sense of like rejection. I found that it was important to integrate my whole experience. And so a huge part of that work led me to obviously witness the power of really having a shared experience, sitting across from someone who's had similar experiences and journeying alongside them, and then really witnessing what happens to shame. When you're not, it's really, really powerful because you are, in a way, the healing is bi-directional. And so even though it's like a microcosm of that big experience of collective healing, in that moment, there's something happening on an individual level, but it's also happening on a collective because you understand that this person is of a shared experience with you. And so when I think of shame, and I often come into discussing shame because shame is such a big part of the work. And Mick, I think you brought in our discussion, you kind of brought attention to this idea of it's really grief work. And that's shame is kind of like this cloak that we wear, and we don't want to be seen in it. And we don't know how to allow anyone else to come in either. And so a lot of the work is even just sitting across someone and speaking to them while that cloak is there. And seeing ways to help either enter or slowly kind of remove it. But there's often such deep pain that's underneath it. And so, as you know, so when I think of shame on a community base, it's really, I always think of the protective component of shame and how powerful it is. And in that, many of our communities have experienced for centuries, and to this day, violent colonial aggression and a robbing of identity. And a lot of what happened was a need to really hold on tight to identity in this way. And so what ended up happening, because colonial violence is so extreme, trauma is extreme, often what we find is then the response is also extreme. And that's at least what I've come to sort of experience and understand when I witness firsthand when I journey alongside folks, but also in my own work and coming from a similar experience as Hajer in terms of the hypervigilance, the control, the surveillance, where shame might have at one point kind of served as just a way of repair, bringing attention to the collective, of how we can be in a collective, of how we can survive as groups, and give us an opportunity for repair and kind of lead us back to maybe a moral compass. Now it's really become not just an experience of shame, it became an identity almost that's carried in the way we view ourselves and the way we view the world, especially with migration. So I often think of it as like, okay, even in Iraq, and especially Hajer with multicultural background, with Palestinian also identity, and that has happened historically, but it continues to happen. And then we needed to migrate to places that marginalized us, right? And that have been the source of so much of that violence. And so naturally, many of our communities needed a way to survive that. And I see shame as playing that role, really. And we can understand, I always, as we work to understand shame, because nobody wants to sit in shame. No one wants to feel in shame, But as we work to bring compassion and understanding, we can understand impact. And that understanding can then lead to a little bit more tolerance in even just understanding its protective nature can help us kind of sit with it and hold it, as soul-sucking as it is, together. It can't be held alone. It's not really something, it's such a relational experience because of, again, relational violence that has happened, that that we really need, yes, this micro, but then we need the greater experience of having safety within communities that we create. And that's what that's what I loved about Hajer's work, is really brought attention to the creative resources that are inherent in all of us, and for us specifically, Arab and Muslim girls, where we came together to create these like enclaves of just kind of connection and speaking about our experiences where we could be seen. And it's hard because you don't know who is taking what information and sharing it with who else in the community. And so being able to find the group of people who feel safe and who you can explore things with without shame is really the first kind of I find, at least in my personal experience, was the first instance of healing that has happened that led me to then, okay, I can have someone else that is outside of that can sit in shame with me. And so as I think of sort of the healing and moving forward, I think for folks who might have not attended, because I'm going to make a lot of reference to Hajer's book launch and opening, and the reading that you did, Hajer, with a bunch of with your sisters and my sister, who's a cousin, in there. And there was as I looked around the room, so many people have shared life experiences with us as we came into that space and that experience. And it was incredibly powerful to me. And that parallel is so, so clear in terms of poetry and then and therapy and healing, and intuitively they're not siloed. Obviously, colonization tries to like silo everything and compartmentalize it, but of course it's all flowing in terms of the healing power. But what was powerful is everyone having that experience who might have read the book individually and or offered language to that experience, but also offered an opportunity to see what courage looks like, because the antidote to shame is also courage, right? And so, but it needs to be safe. We can't be walking around vulnerable everywhere, obviously, especially as racialized folks. But in that room, there was something so powerful in that. So many of us carry these intergenerational stories that are really quite embodied, and they're untold stories in our systems. And we're offered a space where we can have it reflected and mirror back at us, but share it together. But what was most powerful to me, and Hajer, I haven't, this is also not something that I shared with you, but is having our mothers witness that. But, and it just makes me so emotional, honestly, thinking about it, because that's not necessarily a path of healing that they want to explore, or it's not necessarily something that they were comfortable with, or reading some of the poems definitely created discomfort. But there was um, such a such a blatant expression of pride, because they could sometimes hold on to parts of us that they feel they can resonate with, and that given the trauma and the histories that they carry, that in itself was therapeutic, and it felt like it was kind of healing backwards in the present and then forward as we take that work with us. And so that still stays with me, because I was so eager to like call my mom, be like, what did you think about Hajer's reading? Just to be like, there's a part of me that's like, man, you're gonna see something else, hopefully, but no. It was like, well, I was not happy with it, but I'm so proud of her. And she sat through the entire reading and she bore witness to it. And so even if it's not spoken, um, it's felt. And a lot of times that's actually healing in our communities. It doesn't need to be spoken in this way, but it can be collectively felt as we move forward, and we work with intergenerational trauma. So I think I'm at 15, so I'm gonna stop right now. I have more reflections, but I'll I'll stop right here.
Zainab, thank you so much for that talk and for sharing those about your work and those reflections. I think I feel very confident to speak to everyone in this room that the way in which you speak to the power of shared experience, and grounding that as actual healing and the healing that happens at that collective level, is such an inspiring frame. And I love how tangible the examples you give are, and it feels so engaging. And I feel so inspired by the work you're doing to bring communities together and bring those witnesses together to make healing possible and real and lived. Thank you
Appreciate
so much.
you so much.
Um, as we turn now into our Q&A period, I will just gently remind the audience that if you do have questions for Hajer or Zainab, that you can leave those in the chat. But to start off, I'd love to hear any reflections from either of you on each other's practices, reflections sparked tonight or in leading up to the event, or as you two have discussed each other's work. Maybe Hajer, you could start us off.
Yeah, thank you so much, Zainab. I was taking so many notes because I love, like, I don't often get to hear you talk about this, so it really is so meaningful for me. Um, I First, the thing about our moms, like it was kind of that same that thing that I felt like at the book launch where um and kind of anytime I read out loud from the book, or I do any of these, like any kind of event or connect with anyone, like it feels it's so amazing for me to embody the work in that way of like actually reading it out loud. And with the response from not just like our moms, but just like that generation, I think it was kind of the same thing of like they don't necessarily love what I'm writing about, but are proud in a way that like I'm sure you feel this maybe with the work that you do, Zainab, like bringing attention to the things that are what they might feel is like we're judging them as parents, or like we're pointing out the things that are wrong about the community, which is not what we're trying to do at all, but it's the only way to move forward. And like in writing the book, I also interviewed my mom for one of the poems. And that was really important for me to do because it was the first time for me that like I was able to kind of interact with her in that way as just two women talking about our experiences and not necessarily as mother and daughter. And I have to create that for myself, right? Like it's not gonna be offered to me like from my mom or from other people in her generation. Um, but I the other thing I just wanted to say, like, and why I was thinking about this overlap between the poet and the therapist is not just this role of the like the observer and the recorder, but also to be that person in the community, like you're saying, like it takes courage to work through the shame, and you kind of have to sacrifice or like compromise. For me, I felt like in writing the book, like I was trying as hard as I could to keep the other girls anonymous, but I had to compromise my own anonymity. And it is really difficult to do that. And like I it was one thing writing the book and then I was publishing it and I was like, oh shit, like now my name is actually associated to it and people are going to see the things that I'm writing. And so I really had to think about like how to like how to continue protecting myself and to really like focus on the book as a way and like doing this kind of work as a way of building community. And I'm at the same time thinking about things I might change for the future as well, like with future projects, because I do think um it's a really like difficult and kind of risky decision to to be so blunt, like you said, Zainab. But yeah, it's important, but it's hard. Like I think I'm trying to think of how to kind of still remain boundaried, I guess, while doing this kind of work. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious about how the protection as well, but um I admire the courage, and I think for me it's even if women within our communities or some of the girls that we grew up with may not be able to fully embody or fully inhabit and live within that level of courage and really integration, that there is so much that could be borrowed from what you've shared, that can help inform their healing, but also give them a bit of like a felt sense of what it does feel like to really be authentic and be ourselves in spaces so courageously. But I think it is hard. I think it's a continuous, I mean, I still to this day sometimes walk into certain spaces, and this goes to both spaces, right? Whether it's spaces, shared spaces that we have within our community, or spaces where I don't see myself reflected, and the shame will creep up. And it's just like, oh shit, am I wearing, is this good enough? Or is this like low enough? Or and I need to almost catch myself because it's so protective and so fast. And so, and in that way, just even thinking about, okay, how do I come back to my authentic self? What is my value here? And being allowed to explore that is kind of like our life work, really. And so of course, I'm curious to hear about the ways you've also come to boundary and keep yourself safe because it does take a lot of risk.
Yeah.
And I did think about that for you when I was reading it as well.
I think some of it is like you kind of just have to just kind of be like, okay, like fuck it. I'm just gonna I'm just gonna do it and like whatever happens, happens. But also like I can kind of like hide a little bit behind that character of X because it's not clear like what's my story or what's another girl's story. And actually another thing I was thinking about when you were talking, Zainab, of like um uncovering trauma and trauma disembodies us. When I was something I was thinking about, like when I was doing the interviews with the girls in our community, so
Mm,
many of them were telling me like these weren't things they had thought about at all. And like it took them some time actually to like think about what their answers were. And then once we got going, it was like everything would come out. Like they had been carrying so much of that.
mhm.
And I think part of that also was what was like, and I'm sure you must feel this in your work too, like once you start feeling some of that and like seeing how needed that is, like we need to just share with each other because I think we grew up like not just that we were told to be ashamed, but also told like or kind of made to feel like you're the only one going through this. And you felt so different from anyone else in the community. And you felt like it was you against everyone else. Like everyone was judging you for everything you were doing, and no one else was doing those things, which was so not the case. Um, and even after, like, with the book coming out, like, I've had people come up to me and say, like, I haven't had these kinds of like super open conversations with my like with my sisters even, like let alone my mother. Um
Mhm.
and yeah. It's hard, but it's really
So
necessary, I
hard.
think.
And I think that speaks to that witnessing that I was referring to, but that missing experience, really. So many times when I'm sitting across someone and they're about to tell me something that they know is aib or shameful in Arab culture or Muslim culture, there's just such difficulty even bringing it into the process. But so much healing happens when it is brought into the process and there's no judgment actually and there's a way to hold space for it. um Obviously in the therapeutic work there are limits to how much we share in terms of our personal experiences, but also bringing in ourselves into the process. But sometimes it's really not about the personal at all. It's just having someone that they have a shared experience with that they can now speak this to, right? And have a different experience than, let's say, um, being in a community that isolated them. Because that's the role of shame, right? It is to make you feel like you are alone in this, truly. And that's why it's sort of one of the most protective, I think, survival responses that we can have so that we can hang on tight and never really um, allow ourselves. And sometimes, like, shame is protective again in the sense of I I don't know that I'd be sharing everything with everyone or even just some bits about your work with certain people where I know I'm not going to be safe with, right? Or those experiences. Like that's where I would see it being protective and I could choose. But I think the choice is where that healing happens because a lot of us didn't choose. We were just like, you can't speak about anything unless it's outside of the community and outside of people that you have these shared experiences with, but not within the community. And that's the power of your work. It speaks to all of our experiences, and we're all like, yeah, this is exactly our experience, right? And that language is just, yeah, it's so powerful.
That's a great spot for me to jump in because um, I love ending on that note of how powerful the language is on having these disparate experiences uh, have a collective notion of feeling seen, of doing that sort of work that Zainab was talking about in your presentation, and the collective healing that is through that. And it was so wonderful to hear you two in conversation. I think this is a conversation that I hope more can witness. It is recorded on YouTube, so if anyone wants to send this around later, but also um, between the two of you, I feel there is so much still to explore, and I hope as myself to get to witness you two again in conversation, because it was really so um, beyond moving. And we are so lucky to have you as guests here tonight. So thank you so much for joining and sharing, um, for sharing all your wisdom, all your creativity, and um, and really lighting up the space with words and wisdom that is so important. Um, Everyone in the room, I encourage you to be, even though we can't have our sound on because we break it off, to be giving a big round of applause for Hajer and Zainab and all their work and practices and what it is doing for the collective healing. I know my somatic experience in both of your talks was just absolutely feeling present in the body. And Zainab, when you were saying how trauma disembodies us, the moments where you really feel embodied just feel so important. And even when that can happen digitally, incredible. Thank you everyone for joining tonight. As I said, this talk is recorded. It'll be posted on the League's website, so you can please share amongst your friends and family and wider networks. Thank you so much for joining us, for putting in your work, and we will see everyone again next month. There will be more soon posted on our next event shortly on the League's Instagram and website. And until then, I encourage you to really sit with those reflections that were spurred tonight, and to return to the Samir Project and follow the mutual aids that they're collaborating with. Thank you, everyone. And that's Cross-Pollinations.
Thank you.
Thank you.